So going back to December 2017, I had just turned 30 years old. I was a first-time president and CEO, and I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. But I was getting ready to prep for my first board meeting in that position, and the board meeting was solely focused around tech stack and what it is that we wanted to go and invest in. And I was asking for a pretty hefty price. It wasn't going to be cheap. But as we got through this meeting, I thought I had prepared for everything you could imagine, whether that be the cost, whether that be the products themselves, how the products work, what they look like, who they integrate with. I thought I had this whole master plan. But it wasn't until a board member asked me one question that derailed the entire thing. First question was, who does business with this proposed platform? I'm not going to name names today, but who does business with this platform or service? And I showed them the typical logo slide. We've all seen them, right? You see 17 logos on a screen. It's every major brand in America. That's a pretty go-to tactic for most vendors today. Hopefully they actually work with those vendors. But one of the questions I got was about a specific vendor. Since I saw her face and she did so great today, I'm going to use Velvet Taco. But let's say Velvet Taco happened to be the vendor. Let's say someone said, hey, Velvet Taco's on that screen. What service did they use on this platform? Because this platform has scheduling, it has this, it has that, it has labor, like what, inventory. What are they actually using this service for? And I didn't have that answer. So as a follow-up, I went and got that answer. Come to find out, this vendor had done business with this particular brand back in 2010. And they happen to not use any of the modules or service platforms that this vendor is selling us today. Instead, this vendor created their website for them. Therefore, they're using this logo as just a reference for their business. Lesson learned there is, one, always ask, are these current or former clients? And lesson two, what modules of your platform are these vendors using? That's lesson number one, okay? So that was a gotcha moment. But here's the even tougher question that I got during this session. Why are you trying to change the tech stack? What are you going after? What is the whole purpose? It costs more, but I haven't heard anything about ROI. I haven't heard anything about what it changes. And honestly, it sounds like it's really just giving your team members, your franchisees, and us more capabilities, more of a leg up in terms of day-to-day, but what is it actually driving for the business? And that's where I learned that when we're talking about tech stacks or investment or anything that we're trying to bring new to the table, there should have a greater impact that somehow always ties back to the guest, right? The actual consumers of your business, not just what makes the team member's life easier. Sure, there's enhancements that exist that could lead back to making the guest experience better, but at the end of the day, let's start with the guest first. And I didn't have that. I didn't have that journey. I didn't know what I was really going after. Honestly, I was a young leader who had access to all these different vendors and shows and was just overwhelmed by all the new up-and-comers that were out there, and I wanted to have the best of the best. But none of it came together. None of it made sense for why on earth do we need to change a POS system? Why do we need to change an inventory platform? What are we actually trying to do? And that's where I learned to take a step back and start with the guest. What is the end result we're going after, and how does it tie our consumers closer to our brand and alleviate any pain points or disconnections that may be occurring? And that's really what I want to talk about today, is how do we keep guests at the forefront of everything we do and make sure technology is enabling us to accomplish something, right, with that consumer and draw them in, and then find out what other areas we need to enhance to enable our teams to be able to actually do that. How many of you, by show of hands, are in the hospitality business? Okay, here's where I think we have a disconnect. Hospitality should not be the term we use to define the category in which we do business in. Hospitality really is the product that each of us sell. Hospitality is what we serve. So we can't necessarily be in the hospitality business because then we're taking out the whole service element of that. Our category can be called restaurants. It can be called many other things. But hospitality should be viewed as the product. That's the main reason why people are going out of their ways, leaving their homes to go dine with us in our restaurants, is because there's a little something extra that comes with that food. No matter how good that food is, it's surrounded by hospitality, and people crave that, which is why we're all in business. So we have to shift that mindset of how we go away from being a category in terms of hospitality and actually being the product, and figure out the best way to intertwine that with technology. Going back to the guests, many people think hospitality sits over here and technology sits over there. It's hard to bring them together because a lot of times technology is taking out the human element, right? And so by default, you wonder, well, how could you offer hospitality if you don't have a human who's in front of a guest? How do you offer hospitality through something like a third-party delivery platform? Right? There's a lot of ways to do this, but it's a matter of striving for that excellence of how your brand and all the touch points still make it feel like you're bringing that high level of hospitality with each interaction. Ultimately, we're all trying to elevate our guest experience. That's what we're all going after. We're all fighting for the exact same thing. All of our menus are different, but we're fighting for the exact same thing, the exact same guest. And it's how we draw them in more often by offering a better experience that sits in their minds as a fun, memorable event that they want to tell more people about and keep coming back to us versus the competitor, right? That's what it comes down to. And so we're going to talk about today how we can enable this tech stack with intertwined hospitality to help enhance the guest experience. End of the day, that's it. We're all fighting for the exact same end goal, and our common purpose is how we're going to get and keep more guests coming back more often. That's the name of the game. It's been the name of the game. It's never changed. We're all fighting for the exact same thing. All of you have implemented technology, right? Everyone has gone through a process. We've all had to change POS systems. We've all had to go through these challenging moments that take a lot of time and effort and honestly, in some cases, never really get completed anyways before the next change. So we've all been through that. And I'm sure we've all thought about, hey, we got to do things like empower, we have to enable, we have to engage, we have to do all these things. But where I think sometimes we get a little disconnected or we get a little lost is we're doing these things without having the audience in mind. Because all these words up here on the screen mean something different depending upon who the audience is. Are you talking about the enterprise itself? Are you talking about a franchisee? Are you talking about a team member? Or are you talking about the guest? Because what we choose and how these are actually accomplished change based upon that audience member. And the hardest part is figuring out how do you have a solution that addresses all. So when you look at it, right, going back to enterprise, restaurant, having the guest, these are the three areas that I always challenge my technology team and other leaders in this industry to evaluate technology through. Right? Who is the main audience? I believe the guest should always be at the core. No matter what, the guest is at the core of what we do. That's our main audience. From there, then you can start taking a step back and seeing, okay, how can this system actually help our enterprise, and how can it actually help the restaurants themselves? But as we do this, if we lose sight of that guest, you end up like myself earlier in my career, where I had a bunch of technologies and platforms and systems and services that didn't talk to each other. They didn't necessarily get me closer to any result, but it was the best solution for a particular audience, but not the best solution for all. And you're never going to make everybody happy, but if you have this guiding principle that keeps you organized, it's a lot easier to accomplish that, knowing that we all care about the guests and they're at the forefront, and so everything else might take a back seat, but there is a way to do this together and seamlessly if done properly. And that leads me to optimizing the guest journey. This is really what it comes down to. How do we optimize the guest journey? So I would say for all of us here in this room, regardless of where we are, take a step back and pause. And go back to just literally on a beverage napkin, a piece of paper, wherever, draw out the guest journey. Like physically, what is the guest journey? And what are the touch points that you're trying to achieve? Map that out, because I know many of us have been elevating our tech stack over the years because technology is becoming way more advanced and sometimes outpacing us. So we keep changing and implementing. But sometimes we're losing sight of what that journey is. And are we choosing the right partner because they're the best in the business, or the right partner because they're the best for what our journey is and what we're trying to accomplish? Sometimes those vendor partners aren't the exact same. So you have to really understand what that journey is for you, for your brand, and not only from a digital landscape perspective, but also from within the four walls. What is that overall journey? So let's talk about that. Any marketers in the room, don't attack me because I know there's like 17 other versions of this you could have. I know we could argue the points here, but I wanted to summarize just to the core. Like what it is we're really trying to achieve when we're outlining this guest journey. Whether that's looking at awareness, consideration, working our way down to acquisition, retention, but most importantly, this whole idea of advocacy, right? Raging fans, whatever term you want to use, because there's a big difference between loyalty, right, which is where you really get into retention, and the advocacy part. Loyalty is a purchasing behavior. Advocacy is an emotional connection, and there's a big difference. I take my toddlers to the exact same cafe that is down the street from my house, and I have been doing so for the last 3.5 years. Every Saturday, same meal, same spot. We are loyal. That's because it's convenient. I am not a raging fan. I'm not going to tell you the name of it because it's not something that I would be proud of. It is an overpriced, small little diner, but guess what? I can take my screaming kids there first thing in the morning and get them out of the house. So I am loyal to that brand, but they have not created an advocate of me yet. So there's a disconnect, right? That's not the same thing. So when you're looking at awareness, and this goes back to things like, take third-party delivery as one example. You're building awareness by being on those platforms. I don't even look at them as food delivery platforms. That is strictly brand recognition, brand awareness, especially for new brand, new markets. That just puts your name out there in front of eyeballs. But how are you going to draw that consideration? How are you actually going to acquire that person as a real guest within your restaurant or get them into your first-party platform? So it's a matter of drawing this out and understanding at every touch point with a guest, what message, what offer, what do you have that's going to draw them to the next stage within this overall journey? And the hardest part as leaders is how do we define this for those two categories I mentioned, in restaurant, but also digital, because they're going to be different things, right? Different focus points, and they can't be the exact same. So sometimes that's where you get conflicted with technology. And a lot of times we're trying to simplify our technology stack and have less vendors, but at some points it's good to have more, especially if you have a different audience. I have different technology systems for my corporate restaurants versus than what I have for my franchise restaurants. Some of that's driven by legalities. Some of that's driven because I need something different than what they need. And that goes against the norm of having one system, train one way, have all the brand, operational components be the exact same. Sometimes you have to compromise and adjust based upon the situation and the audience. So map out your journey. I use this as a simple framework to help me do that, and then I get with the marketing team to school me on how there's a million other layers to this. But I like to start simple. And then that gets us to the ecosystem. So when all of us are going out there creating this tech stack, making those tough decisions of do we want best in class, do we want to go with a suite of products, there's a lot of decisions that have to happen. What I would say is start with where you want to be. At Walk-Ons, we have 80 operating units today. However, every decision we are making, whether that's technology, whether that's people, vendors, distribution, you name it, everything that we're evaluating and choosing now is through the lens of if we had 500 restaurants today. We know that we can handle that. We know that we have a market that can support 500 locations over time, and we have the experience. And what we wanted to prevent was going through what all of us have gone through or about to go through, which is here's what you have for your 50 locations, but now you're at 100 and you realize they can't continue with you. And so now you're changing POS systems, now you're changing this, now you're changing that. You're redoing the entire structure of the organization, you're hiring on new leaders. And then you get to 150, you do the exact same thing, then 200, and so on and so forth. And whether it was the hundreds of units that I've led or the thousands of units I led, it's all the same. You go through the exact same pain points, and there's always that reset. But if you're in franchising, you know that every time you have a reset, that puts your franchisees back even more. And that gets momentum slowed down, and it's just an overall setback. And you got to wait years for people to get comfortable again, trusting in you again, and then usually that's right when you make another change. So what we're trying to do is prevent that by saying, hey, let's go ahead and invest in the best right now. Let's spend money like we're at 500 locations, and let's just grow into it. I'm okay if someone says, Kendall, this is too robust of a product for us right now. That's great. You're going to need it when we're at 500. If we want to get there, we have to have that right mindset. So start by understanding where it is you're trying to go, and don't pick a technology partner for where you are today. It's where you want to be. And as you're going through this, it's important to have the right people in the room. And it's important to have an expert in the room who understands all things technology, all things about guests and that guest journey, and can help you really identify what it is you're looking for. As an example, somebody in operations might say something like, hey, I really need a more simple sign-up process for loyalty. Guests are saying it's too robust, it's too difficult, I'm having trouble signing people up. Like, what can you do? You got to have an expert in the room that can help you say things like, what they might be looking for is card-linked loyalty, path of least resistance. You might have somebody in marketing say, hey, ops team, I really need to understand the frequency. What's going on? Like, how often are guests coming back? Do we know anything? Do we have any data? What they're really asking for is a CDP, right, to tell them what the frequency is and driven off of what menu items, what promotion, and how often are people coming back based upon the products and the experience they're having, and vice versa. Why did people stop coming? What's the last thing that the common public is ordering that's leading to them never visiting again? It's understanding what it is we're really trying to solve, not just going off of what we know today or what we think the solution is. Get the right people in the room to really get to the bottom of what you need or want. Because there are solutions today that can solve a lot of these matters. But again, how do you bring all this together? I believe the POS is at the core of all this. The POS has been around for so long, and think about all those years going back to early micros days where you had all this information going into a platform, and there was no way to really extract it. It was almost like the gatekeeper of all the solutions and answers you could ever dream of, but we never really had a way to reach it. We only had what was pre-populated or what we paid those people to go create manually in spreadsheets that took hours and hundreds, if not millions of dollars, right, over the years. Now we have solved that. Most POS systems are elevated. You have access to tons of information, but you still need to plug into things around it. So keeping the guest in mind, what is that tech stack going to look, finding the right POS partner, but then from there, what helps you build out this ecosystem to where, from a guest perspective, there is less breakpoints. The more lines you have, if you can envision your own tech stack, the more lines you have, the more breakpoints you have, the more risk you have, the more cost for integrations you have. Right? The different experiences you have of how something might look when I'm on your website versus how something might look when I actually go order something online from your website, or at least I thought it was from your website. Right? So from a guest perspective, if this is not intertwined, it's not seamless, it's a turnoff. It sets them back. It confuses them. So through our messaging, through our branding, through our actual platforms that we have, it should be something that nobody would ever know the difference on. No one would ever know that you're using something to power it on the back end. And this costs money. This is not cheap. But I think we are far past this idea of technology being an expense, and I think it's fair to say we can all agree it's now an investment. Right? It truly is an investment in how we grow our businesses, and it is a staple. Right? Everybody around us, whether they're in hotels or restaurants or any other business, the guest is more trained and aware of the technologies out there than some of us are, because they're exposed on a daily basis of how others are doing business. And if anything, that sets a new expectation in the eyes of the guest. And if we're not staying up to the times, we will be perceived as somebody who has lost our relevancy, because now guests can't interact with us how they're interacting with others. Right? So it's a matter of being at the top of this game as frequently as you possibly can. Now, when you're going through this process, you're going to deal with a lot of SaaS products, right? It all comes down to SaaS. Everyone talks about SaaS, and that's really everything that I'm talking about, right? Everything technology today is this model. And I always look at these letters as, yeah, of course, that's what it means. Everything in this world now is basically a software as a service. That's what it is, right? So my team is always talking about these SaaS products. They're always talking about what's next. Or you go to the tech conferences and you see the latest and greatest. And to shift perspective and to have more of this, call it guiding force, something that keeps you focused on what you're going after, don't get lost in all the tech jargon that exists today, because it's overwhelming and it can be confusing. So I use a different framework. When I'm thinking about SaaS, I'm thinking about what solutions are actually going to advance my brand's overall accessibility, but also the scalability. That's what we should be thinking about when we're choosing a tech partner. Is it helping us advance our brand forward? Are we more accessible in the eyes of the guests? Are we more accessible to our team members, right? Are we more accessible to our operators? Do we have communication platforms that can bring us closer together? And are we able to scale? If you're at a certain amount of locations today, if you don't have the right partners that can take you to that next batch of 50 or 100 locations, that's a challenge. So it's a matter of finding who you can scale with now. And of course, the caveat to this is, well, what about the cost? What if we truly can't afford it? It's always best to build with the end in mind, and it's okay to have a bridge plan. Know where you want to go, and if you truly can't afford it, at least you know the solution, and you can have that bridge plan, or AKA the more affordable vendor, in the interim, if you have to, as long as it can still check the capabilities. When I build a tech stack outline or a tech stack proposal, and I'm in the middle of this right now and finalizing it on June 27th, I build it out with the capabilities and the access it provides before I ever put a vendor's name in that box. So when you're talking about a board proposal or with your team, it's about the capabilities. What do you want your tech stack to accomplish? Does it check the box on all levels of the guest journey? And if so, now let's start talking about the vendors. But if you can align yourself, your team, your overall brand with the capabilities you need from everybody in the brand's perspective, right? All your leaders, all your executives, your franchisees, you name it, then that's when you have consistency in terms of the approach. you're aligned, and now you can start finding the actual vendors that can check those boxes, and that'll also help them make an easier decision for you in terms of who needs to have the suite of product versus the best-in-class solution. And it's all about what's right for you and your brand in that time frame. And the last point here is, how do we enable this data-driven decision-making? And this is probably an overused term, but it's one of those overused terms that is so true, but until you actually see it in action, you don't realize how valuable it is. And we can do it today based upon what we have, but it usually starts with, what are you trying to solve? Right? All of us have had that day or that meeting where data was just thrown at us. The spreadsheets, the big decks, all this information was thrown at us. But then you always end up asking yourself the so what? Or what do we do with this information? What's next? How do we solve for this? And how much of it was anecdotal versus how much of it was actually coming from a reputable source? And it's a conflicting place to be in. And as you go down this pathway, sometimes you feel like it's lost. Like, which door do I go down? It could be a dark path either which way you go. But I'll share an example of something that's happened just in the last couple weeks for myself. So at Walk-On's, casual dining, full service brand, a lot of products, all made from scratch. We have over 200 SKUs and 72 menu items. It's a beast. 40% of my labor today is hand cutting or hand wrapping something. And I'm working on all this. We're optimizing it for scalability and growth. But one of the things that came up from preliminary data was that we had a giant AVT gap in terms of certain menu items that we prep. And our average, our actual versus theoretical food costs would just add a line. And I asked the team, and they're like, hey, it's been that way forever. It's just a part of how we do business. Got it. Let's go run some more data. Let's find out. We ran some data. Everything's saying that we have a problem. Got that. But what are the guests saying? And this is the missing link. The guests say on these particular items that we have the largest AVT gaps on, the guest says that these are some of their most favorite items. You look at PMIX information. Wow, they're ordered the most in their category. Interesting. So the guests and the sales say that these are great products. The team and the operators say, hey, they're not worth it because I'm always wasting money. I always have higher waste than what I'm selling. And so this data got us down a path. And that path can always help you make a data-driven decision, but there's always going to be some more information. But getting this far is far enough to know now what happens. Either you're going to get rid of these menu items, or you're going to do some digging. We do some digging, unlock some more data. 5 of the items or cases that go into those menu items that we're struggling have a shrinkage problem when they hit a grill, where you can lose, take bacon for example, all the fat, you can lose 25% of what your case weight is just by cooking it. That's a factor you should identify in your recipe. Boom, solve that problem. Now what happens to the gap? Wait a minute, we're still having gaps, we're still having problems. What is it? And it led us to the most simple solution that has eliminated millions of dollars for our brand system-wide. And this little tiny solution that we found out was that nothing was wrong with the product. Guests loved it. They had nothing negative to say about it. It wasn't our internal practices. It's because the brand never put these 6 items on the prep sheet. So every day when these prep teams are getting to work and all this labor that's going into it, they are prepping for everything except for these hot hold items that are almost in all cases proprietary to our brand that our guests love. But because it's not on the prep sheet, because people aren't portioning out enough, they're just throwing out way too much. And it's a simple problem solved that we would have never been able to dial into or really understand the root of it if we didn't have access to that data. Some brands would have eliminated the products immediately or just allowed the problem to continue. So it's a small example, but it adds up to millions, and it was our largest opportunity from a financial standpoint in how we keep our franchisees with higher profitabilities to keep them happy to help open up more restaurants. And that is the ROI of all this, right? When you have the data that arms you with the solutions, or you can take out the long tenured team member who's been around, who knows where the bodies are buried, tells you here's what's wrong, here's the way we do it, here's what our guests love. You take out all that anecdotal information, and you just let the data speak for itself. You get out of that opinion game. And so this is one of those areas where you have to make sure whoever you're choosing, whoever you're partnering with, allows you to have this access and enables you with that path, right? Of what do I do with this information? What is next once I hear or see the areas that are identified? So in summary, You're going to start with the guest journey. You have to identify that physically on paper, on a whiteboard, identify that for what's in your four walls, but also from a digital landscape perspective. What is that guest journey? What do you want to be known for? This should be something you aspire to accomplish. Don't just mimic what you do today. Think about how the guest interaction to brands is changing and how your brand can evolve, and you have to kind of take a peek a little bit ahead into the future of where you want to be. And that's okay if you never get there, but at least you're striving for excellence that's beyond where you are right now. Second is that ecosystem. And this is where it gets complex because you got to have a lot more people involved. Right? You got to get the input and the value and the understanding from everybody on your brand. You got to make sure that you can accomplish it and that it's seamless first for the guest. Then can it still be seamless for your team members, and can it still be seamless for you as an enterprise? Sometimes the answer is yes, but sometimes the answer is no. You have to understand where is it that you're okay saying no. Because if it does not drive that guest back in more often, then it's probably not as important as what interface the team member prefers when they're working a shift, right? There's bigger picture items that sometimes we have to sacrifice. And the last thing is the data-driven component. Now, when you're going through this, I challenge you all to look at what is really happening in your industry, right, with your competitors, not just the vendors or what you are seeing today, right? There's an amazing list of vendors here right now. But which is right for you? And the only way to understand that is for other concepts like you, how are they interacting with the guest? Or for the highest volume, businesses in your communities, what is driving them in? What do they have that's different than you? And is there something that you can leverage that either gets you on par to where you have to be more of a fast follower with your competitors, or something where you can be the innovator? Right? Maybe there's something you can own from a technology perspective that fits your brand that doesn't fit your competitors. But start to find those and how that intertwines with this whole idea of investing in future technologies to drive the business forward. Invest in the best so you can stand out from the rest. This is a reminder. This is a reminder that all of us have this option today. It's an investment. You have to challenge yourselves, your board, your whoever. You have to challenge the mentality of this being the expense and always saying things like, well, this is what we could afford. Or, sorry, team, can't go with that loyalty program because this one's cheaper. Which one is best for you and your brand? That's really what all this comes down to. Now, when you are going through this process, and you are trying to really understand your consumer, you're trying to understand what's next, leverage the people in this room, leverage our industry. There's so much valuable knowledge and insights amongst everybody in this room and all of our suppliers and vendors and partners. We have to leverage that. If anything, we have to get closer as a community because the guest landscape is changing, and sometimes, like I mentioned, it's outpacing where our restaurants are going. And it's always best to be armed with what's going on in the industry in addition to anything else you have access to from a data perspective. And so I love events like this where you can take things back and be able to show to whoever it is you need to show that there's something going on in this industry that we need to go and invest in to make sure that we do stand out from the rest. Now, all of us here share the exact same most valuable resource, and that is our time. And I am truly appreciative of the fact that you've spent the time here with me today. My name is Kendall Ware. Thank you all. Appreciate it.